Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I'm your host Deepak. I'm honored to welcome Professor Benjamin Lecker, Professor of Leadership and Postgraduate Research Director in the Department of Leadership, Organizations, Behavior and Reputation at Henley Business School, University of Reading, as our esteemed guest on today's podcast episode. Professor Benjamin Lecker is a distinguished scholar whose interdisciplinary research, supported by grantors such as the Leverhulme Trust and the British Academy, explores how leaders navigate global crises, including geopolitical unrest, climate change, and economic and health inequalities. His research has been published in top-tier journals, including the Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Management Studies, Human Resource Management, Organization Research Methods, European Journal of Operational Research, Business History, Harvard Business Review, and MIT Sloan Management Review. The managerial insights derived from his research have led to the publications of 5 best-selling books, including Closing the Service Gap, published by Financial Times in 2023, and Job Crafting, the MIT Press, published in 2024, recently, co-authored with the editor-in-chief of Long Range Planning. Beyond academia, Professor Lecker contributes to the New York Times and Forbes, where he interviews global political leaders, including Malaysia's Prime Minister, on socio-environmental strategy. He also advises Canadian and UK government administrators and participants in US House Select Committee hearings, shaping legislative proposals presented to Congress. He serves as an associate editor at the Journal of Business Research and reviews grant applications for the Economic and Social Research Council and the Norwegian Research Council. Additionally, he holds a visiting professorship at the University of London following a prior appointment at the University of Chicago. In this episode, Professor Benjamin Lecker will share insights from his research, the benefits and risks of rehiring a Boomerang employee, published in MIT Sloan Management Review. So without further delay, let's welcome Professor Benjamin Lecker to the podcast. Professor Benjamin Lecker, it's an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
Thank you.
Yeah. Professor, what inspired your research on Boomerang employees, and why do you think it's particularly relevant in today's labor market?
Post-pandemic, we're seeing a number of different ways that organizations engage with workforces. And you only have to look at happening right now, whether that's about where to work from, such as an office or from home or a hybrid, where to work in terms of hours, whether that be a 5-day week or 4-day week, whether that be favorable hours or not. And then whether or not to ever return to an organization that you've been part of. Many of these written rules or unwritten rules are being challenged. And so to study Boomerang employees or workers really came as a result of a wider piece of work that looked at the tearing up of traditional norms related to the workplace and thinking about instances that both workers and the companies that they engage with would find advantageous. So, for example, the debate around where to work, whether that be an office or a home, if there's benefits for both about a location, does it really matter what the location is? And similarly, where in the past there may be an idea that suggests you should never go back. Well, what's that actually based upon? Because if there are benefits for both the worker and the organization, then why has it been a taboo subject up until now? And actually, can we not frame this as a potential advantage, a benefit for both workers and the organizations that they engage with? And hence, that's where our interest in it really lay.
In the article, you mentioned that Boomerang employees are more common now than in years past. What factors have contributed to this trend?
The primary contributing factor is the reduction of tenure, if we can use that word in an employability sense, that workers have with the organizations that they engage with. So traditionally and historically, tenure would be longer and less varied for a worker. So you hear stories, for example, 30, 40, 50 years ago, where an individual enters into a company and they stay there for the entire duration of their 30-year career. Very few persons then would leave the company, or certainly the sector. Fast forward maybe 15 years, and you would then have more experiences or more narrative around individuals who moved company. So that became more common. Then, if you fast forward to today, you will have individuals who are actively seeking shorter lengths of time within an organization so that they can have a more varied career. And this can often include careers within careers, where persons may do a decade in a certain sector and then do something completely different for the next sector, or have careers that are running concurrently, so having side hustles. So they may have their primary career and they may then have a secondary career that is completely different. So all in all, the frequency and the reduction in length of time means that people are more often looking for the next opportunity. So because you're looking for more, that then means there's more probability that a company that you have previously engaged with or worked with becomes more viable. And hence, that's why it is more common.
You discuss onboarding speed as a major advantage of rehiring former employees. Could you elaborate on how their prior knowledge of company culture and processes impact their reintegration?
Yes, and what's interesting here, although it's being framed as a new novel idea for companies, the central premise for us as researchers, the first time that we were familiar with this as an idea actually lay within academia itself, and specifically at Harvard University. So if you were to undertake a PhD at Harvard, the unwritten rule is you will not work here immediately. You will engage with the PhD process, so typically it might be 3 years or 4 years, and then you have to go out and find work in another institution if you choose to stay within academia, and if you don't, then go out into the world of work. We encourage you to build the experience and at some point come back or to boomerang back, but only once you have built experience of the external environment. Because we recognize that while you are here, you're learning about the ways that we do things, the culture, the processes, the systems, the structures, the routines. But in order to understand why they work, or alternatively, why they don't, you have to have a point of reference. And the point of reference can only exist once you have a comparison. And that's why the encouragement or even the forceability is you have to leave. Once you are then external, you begin to see things differently. Perhaps that reinforces the processes, or perhaps you see things that are done differently. When you then boomerang back, firstly, it's very easy comparison to somebody who hasn't been there to be onboarded because you already know the central culture and some of the systems, the routines, the structures, the processes, etc. So that can help. But secondly, you're typically coming back with a motivation to share the knowledge that you've gleaned on your travels, and either to reinforce the practice that is currently occurring within inside the organization because you've seen other examples of things that are worse, or you've seen examples of things that are better, and therefore you're looking to come in and improve. And so either one of those examples, and it can be that it's in combination, you are looking to come in with great motivation to make the workplace better than it was when you left it. So while we saw that example at Harvard, it was only then when we started really seeing it inside companies that we got very excited because we could see that there are just endless benefits of hiring the boomerang worker.
Professor Lecker, your research also suggests that boomerang employees tend to have higher job satisfaction and stronger performance compared to external hires. What factors contribute to this increased commitment?
Well, as we said here, going back, there already implies a motivation to do so. If one was not committed or motivated or interested in returning, then you wouldn't be considering the boomerang opportunity. So you, from a data perspective, you're already eradicating those who may not be committed or motivated, or perhaps those who have bad experiences. Similarly, if you think about your personal life, you only ever go back to a holiday destination that you have fond memories of. You wouldn't return otherwise. So you're already at an advantage because you're returning and you're looking to return. That means that you must have some good memories. It must mean that you have something that you wish to create or add value to, as opposed to those who are new hires. For them, it's a question mark. They don't know yet how the experience is going to be for them. It's an unknown. And so for that reason, when you're comparing the two data sets and the two clusters, those who have the prior experience will always be more motivated, one could argue, or certainly more pleased to be returning, I think, than those who have no prior reference point.
Beyond performance and satisfaction, what unique skills or perspectives do returning employees bring to an organization, especially if they have worked for competitors?
So much information that the host organization can benefit from, because either, and these can be in combination, either it's a reinforcement and a confirmation that having seen the world outside, the way that you do things currently internally is the best way. Or the inverse, the way that others are doing things is much better, and therefore we have to improve current practice. But unless you have the external point of view, you can't know that. So it takes an individual to go outside and then boomerang back to bring that knowledge.
Hiring and onboarding costs are a major concern for businesses. Can you share insights on how boomerang employees help companies reduce hiring cost and recruitment risk?
Some of the engagements that we have seen actually have implicit, maybe even irregular or temporary engagement prior to them officially boomeranging back. So it could be in an unofficial capacity. So maybe they are an affiliate or an associate, or maybe they're part of an alumni group or part of a networking event. Some sort of low level, low friction, irregular engagement, but it's more than zero. So what it means is for that individual, they are on the periphery of the organization, but they are still engaged with it somehow. It's like if you have that favorite holiday destination and part of you thinks, I would love to go back. So I'm going to sign up to the newsletter, or I'm going to follow them on Facebook. So every now and then you see, okay, they're developing this thing or they're now doing this thing. You're aware at a low level of developments. And so when the time comes, that individual, they are already aware of a large proportion of what is occurring so that the hiring, when it's official and when you have to immerse them in the culture, this individual is already self-averse. They've done it themselves. And so while there then be confidential information to make them aware of, everything else that's not confidential, they are themselves already bought in and aware, and that's how then it can reduce costs.
You mentioned that companies can save between 1/3 and 2/3 on recruiting cost when rehiring former employees. Can you break down where these savings come from?
A lot of the cost with hiring, you think, certainly from a senior position, is the search and find. So if I were a recruiter or a headhunter and I'm having to search and find from scratch, that's quite a lot of work. But with a boomerang or a potential boomerang individual, I already have a list because I'm keeping tabs on individuals who have worked with us in the past and are engaged with us at a low level. Similarly, if you think about the holiday example, if I have to find new guests from scratch, that's more expensive than simply going through the history and thinking people who have holidayed with us before and who are signed up to our newsletter are clearly interested in returning. That's a lower cost because we already have found them than trying to find new customers completely from scratch. And that's the large proponent of the cost.
Professor Lecker, one of the biggest risks of rehiring is that boomerang employee might leave again. How can companies assess whether a returning employee is genuinely committed to staying for long term?
Well, I don't think you can know that for certain for any person, but it's about whether or not the fear is necessary. If an individual has left you once and they boomerang back, it means that they are a boomerang employee. And therefore, you can also conclude it is unlikely that that individual will ever stay in any organization forever. But be positive, they have boomerang back. So expect that they would leave again, but why would they not boomerang back again? And so don't be fearful of that. Encourage it, perhaps even entertain it. Think about what the horizon, the window would be for them to return, and then maybe expect them and let them and encourage them go in order to come back again. Don't expect a boomerang employee to return and then be so shocked that they might do it again. And if you were fine with it in the past, sufficiently enough that you would welcome them back, why would you then change your orientation and your perspective on this individual? You shouldn't. And if you do, that's your fault. Because why would you expect it?
You highlight the importance of understanding why the employee left in the first place. What are some red flags that might indicate a rehire is still a flight risk?
For me, it's understanding why they are coming back. There may be instances where an individual has not learned as much as you would have liked them to learn. And maybe they are seeking something familiar as opposed to truly looking to come back because they are going to add value or contribute. So for me, being honest with them and trying to ascertain why they left and then framing their time away as a positive and an opportunity. What have you learned? and what can you contribute to the organization with the knowledge that you've learned? If the answers to those questions are null and void, then for me, that's the red flag. Because if the individual is not returning with information that can add value, then why would you bring them back? You might as well just have an external hire. So answering the question with sufficient detail and value add is, for me, is key.
Professor Lecker, how should organizations navigate potential conflict between returning employees and their former colleagues, particularly if unresolved tensions exist?
It's a challenge for certain. And for me, this is one of those issues that if it's not resolved early, perhaps even before the hiring is official, then don't proceed. Just because an individual has worked in a similar organization or the same organization before doesn't mean that they have to be or should be treated differently from an external new hire. In fact, they shouldn't. Because you can imagine if you're adding a team member back into an existing team who worked there before, you can instantly change the dynamics and the culture of said team because of what happened previously. So they must understand that they're not going to be given special privileges. It's a different time now than when they left. This is not a continuation of the team dynamics and the culture that they previously fit into. But this is what culture work and teaming is all about. Those negative aspects that could arise can equally happen with new hires from competitors or those who have worked in different domains before. So you would expect the same principles to apply. This is a team. This is a new culture. We expect you to fit within it. We expect the way that you frame your experience to be positive and to be contributory to the team. And if it's not, then HR needs to do what HR must do.
You emphasize setting crystal clear expectations before rehiring. What are some key conversations that should take place before extending a job offer?
Thinking about what the requirements are, why the organization wishes that individual to return. So they shouldn't be dismissive of the fact. And I've seen instances where companies almost try to pretend that they knew that the individual worked for them previously, as if it never happened. But that's silly. They should be encouraging of the fact. They have to both be very transparent and visible. We had an engagement before, the engagement ended. The engagement then from an employee or a worker side continued, but in another domain. And now the time is right for both to re-engage again. So what is different now than at a point where they choose to leave? Is it because there's a new role with more expectation, more hierarchical opportunity, more pay? Like, what is different now? What is attractive for the worker to return that was not attractive enough for them to leave? And similarly, from the organization, what is attractive about hiring a boomerang worker as opposed to hiring somebody who has never worked here before? If both parties are transparent and willing to ask those questions, because some are not, then you can have a really strong foundation for a relationship.
While former employees are already familiar with the organization, you mentioned that a structured onboarding process is still necessary. How should onboarding be tailored specifically for Boomerang employees?
From a HR perspective, it shouldn't be much different because employment contracts are the same for whether you are a boomerang or whether you're not. And actually, from employment law, it's irrelevant what you have done in the past. You don't have a different type of employment law that protects boomerang than another. It's irrelevant. So from an organizational perspective, although an individual may have already seen, for example, an onboarding video, or they may know things that you're teaching them in onboarding, they have to do it anyway because of legality, and it's a regulatory requirement. So do not skip things that are there because compliance requires them to be there. It may be that from HR, they can acknowledge and say things like, I know you know this, but you have to do it. These are the reasons why you need to do it. If you were not to do it for some regulatory reason, it would be dismissal. So yes, it's fine to acknowledge, but also certain regulatory things need to just get done, and therefore it has to happen.
How can companies foster an environment where boomerang employees feel valued rather than perceived as individuals who gave up on the company before?
Being open and honest about why they're coming back and the value that they can bring when they come back. So it can be exciting because an individual is then coming back and bringing new knowledge, new ideas, new thinking, experiences maybe from competitor. That framing is key, and it's the framing that can help individuals change from a negative, like you deserted us, to a positive. This person went out, saw the world, and now they're coming back and they're going to help us as a team, as an organization, be better for it.
With the rise of remote work and changing job expectations, do you foresee boomerang hiring becoming even more prevalent in the future?
I would say so. I think so, because more working engagements are becoming shorter. And so the frequency would indicate that there are more engagements within organizations. And the frequency will increase more than the pool of workers available. And therefore, even mathematically, you would expect boomerang to increase because there will be shorter but more engagements with inside companies. So one would expect these engagements have to be done by people who have worked in the same organization prior. And so for that reason, yes, I would say absolutely.
Professor, how should organizations strategically incorporate boomerang hiring into their overall talent acquisition strategy?
I think it would be too simple to simply say that there's a particular track within hiring that's specifically for boomerang, because on the whole, I don't think it's fair to say that boomerang are always better than external hire. I don't believe that. And so I think it would be a mistake to say that they have to have a specific track just for boomerang. But I think that for every hire, it could be a question of whoever the hiring officer is, simply to say, have you considered a boomerang worker for this engagement, for this position? Just a question. So it's a prompt. Have they considered it? And if they have, and there's no suitable candidates, then yes, then go external. Similarly, have you considered internal employees or internal workers for this position? So go internal first, then go to boomerang, then finally go external if the first two can't be met. For me, that would be best practice.
Are there specific industries or type of roles where rehiring boomerang employees is especially beneficial or more common?
You will see it more commonly within roles that are almost always contract, because the definition of those roles is that an individual works for themselves, and so they are a contractor, as opposed to being an employee. And that's why I'm specific about my wording. I don't try to say employees as often as say workers, because worker would imply different things within employment law. So yes, those who have set themselves up as self-contractor, self-employed, and therefore seek multiple engagements over a short period of time are going to be more common. So, for example, in IT or within coding, within security, these are individuals who their definition of working life is a portfolio-based career. So you would see it much more common as opposed to an individual, for example, who works in say, HR within a big company. So they're employed and they are only doing HR for the company. Their career expectancy of the role that they are in typically is going to be much longer than a contractor who's already expecting that this might be a 3-month engagement or a 6-month engagement that would then be renegotiated.
Professor, my last question. If a company is hesitant about rehiring a former employee, what key factors should they consider making an informed decision?
Ultimately, it comes down to whether or not that person can add more value having left and be willing to return than an external hire. And if they possess information that an external hire doesn't have, then for me, I would always hire them. Now, remember that an external hire may have information about the external world, about how a competitor does things, about how an industry operates. So they already have an advantage. What they don't have over the Boomerang is the point of reference of how things are done internally. So you may have a bias as an external hire that things are done better externally. The Boomerang worker can have, therefore, the advantage of knowing both what happens internally and externally, so that they can have a more grounded, objective view. And for me, it is the objective view that overall means that they could be of more value.
Professor Benjamin Lecker, it has been an absolute honor having you on today's episode. Your insights on the benefit and risk of rehiring Boomerang employees have provided valuable perspectives for organizations navigating today's competitive job market. Your deep expertise spanning leadership, organizational behavior, and global crises has illuminated not just the practical advantages of rehiring former employees, but also the critical considerations companies must weigh to ensure successful reintegration. The strategic implications of your research, published in MIT Sloan Management Review, offer a compelling roadmap for businesses seeking to leverage Boomerang talent effectively. Beyond today's discussion, your contributions to academia, government policy, and global leadership dialogues continue to shape how organizations and societies adapt to complex challenges. From your work at Henley Business School to your advisory roles in government and legislative discussions, your impact is truly remarkable. Thank you for sharing your expertise and time with us. We look forward to following your future research and insights.
Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, thank you for the wonderful questions that you've asked.
Thank you, Professor.